Daddyyyyyyy Gorge. It spanned 7 mountain peaks and overflowed with verdant greenery. Scattered every which within were springs and dark rivers, waterfalls and wondrous stones, deep valleys and soaring peaks. As the name Hopeless Land implied, some of its terrain represented the brink of despair, yet, in the next moment, as if confirming that every cloud had a silver lining, you would spot paths winding from the peaks, indelible and unerasable. In Shen Qingyuan's eyes, such a reminder was vital for both adventurers and homebodies. The new talent participating in the conference following the agreed-upon arrangements and stood in well-ordered rows surrounding a gigantic natural stone platform before the gorge. Disciples from the 4 great cultivation sects made up the main share of the participants. Changqiu Mountain was in the lead, followed closely by Zhaohua Monastery, Tianyi Temple, and Huanhua Palace. Of the 4 sects, Changqiu Mountain was the most comprehensive. The 12 peaks each had their own strengths in a variety of fields. Meanwhile, the monastery and temple sects were naturally those who fostered Buddhist monks and Taoist priests, respectively. Huanhua Palace was more complicated. Their sect followed the teachings of a number of different schools, had an aptitude for the Taoist art of concealment, and interacted the most with the secular world. The level of their techniques were unclear, but on one point there was no doubt. They were absolutely the wealthiest of the sects. They contributed the most funds to every conference. Other than these 4, numerous small and mid-sized sects were also participating. Therefore, the final number of those who had signed up and gathered at Daddyyyyyyy Gorge was well over 1,000. What had been a cold and silent gorge entrance suddenly burst to life with more than 1,000 people. Animals that had never seen people before were all frightened away. It was unusually lively in all meanings of the word. A high dais had been constructed at the entrance to the gorge, and from there all the non-participating cultivators would observe the battles. Various colored flags representing each of the sects fluttered and swayed upon it. Seats from the sect leaders were at the highest level. Changqiu Mountain's delegation, led by Yue Qingyuan, took their place on the dais. Shen Qinqiu sat in the back next to an elderly man of great poise and a head of white hair. This man had greeted their group earlier and nodded to him again now.
"Immortal Master Shen,"
he said. Huanghua Palace's old palace master was also the master of Luo Binghe's birth mother. Shen Qinqiu returned the greeting in the mode of someone meeting the emperor's relative. Not long after, a member of Huanghua Palace walked onto the stone platform. After all, they'd contributed the most money, so no one could argue with their choice of host. Below the platform, the over 1,000 competitors gradually quieted, focusing their attention on listening to the host describing the proceedings. The host's martial foundations were deep, his breathing plentiful and long-lasting. Every last person at the mouth of the gorge, including those on the soaring dais, could clearly hear his voice in full. The conference will last for 7 days. Once everyone enters the gorge, we will erect a giant barrier and cover the entirety of Daddyyyyyyy Gorge. For those 7 days, the participants who enter Daddyyyyyyy Gorge will be isolated from the outside world and will remain ignorant to what happens there. The observers will follow the situation within via the spirited eagles let loose above the valley. The total number nears 5,000. Every time you take down a creature, you will receive a prayer bead from its body. The creatures are of different difficulty levels, and the spiritual chi within the prayer beads will likewise vastly differ. Is everyone wearing a gold cord around their wrists? The people beneath the platform raised their wrists together, revealing a sea of gold cords. It was quite the magnificent sight. The host continued, "When you obtain a bead, thread it onto the cord. Your scores will automatically be displayed on the ranking charts outside." The ranking charts were displayed opposite the dais. Although there were 8 charts in total, The crowd's attention would be squared on the names of the top 100 scorers on the first, gold-inscribed tablet at the top, and at times they would be watching only the top 10. This embodied the principle of no first place among scholars, no second place amongst martial artists, which meant that martial artists will always strive to be first. Finally, the Huanghua Palace host delivered a severe warning. Sect disciples are forbidden from fighting over and stealing each other's beads. The moment anyone is found to be fighting or using underhanded methods to steal beads, their right to participate will be revoked, and they will be banned from the conference for 3 sessions. 3 sessions meant 12 years. This group of new talent was like a mix of carp and dragons. Many were young and inexperienced, but quite a few were slippery old bastards, scoundrels who'd scurried about for years and years. If duels weren't forbidden, the organizers had reason to fear that the entire conference would devolve into incomparable chaos, and their lives might as well be lost. Therefore, this rule was exceptionally necessary. Shen Qingqiu was bored to the point that his bones itched. Though he seemed to be staring intently at the scene beneath him, his mind had long since wandered off. Suddenly, from the side, several female members of a certain sect leader's entourage whispered among themselves.
"Which sect is that disciple from? He's incredibly handsome. Those white robes really suit him, maybe even better than they do on Gongyi, Martial Brother." "But Gongyi, Martial Brother, isn't just extraordinarily handsome. He also possesses incredible spiritual strength. How can you compare them?" You just can't stand anyone criticizing Gongyi, Martial Brother, can you? Sure enough, you defend him right away. Admit it. Huh? Admit what? Stupid girl, what did you just say? I dare you say it again.
A burst of mortified, frustrated anger was followed by giggling play-fighting. As soon as he heard them, Shen Qingqiu knew who they were eyeing. The figure in the crowd dressed all in white, the refined, outstanding Luo Binghe. In truth, they weren't the only ones secretly watching and discussing him. Even a number of the girls in the crowd of participants below the stone platform were glancing stealthily at Luo Binghe, their jade-like cheeks dusted with blushing red. The girls kept their voices very low, but given the quality of cultivators present, their 5 senses all extremely sharp, of course they were overheard. These girls were too young to be careful, and they let others hear their private conversations. Fortunately, their seniors were all very considerate and let their sect leader, who was already holding a hand to his forehead and feigning sleep, keeping his dignity. Everyone pretended that they hadn't unintentionally eavesdropped, their gazes straight and unflinching. In an effort to break the awkwardness, someone coughed twice. "Why don't we do as we have before and make our predictions about which one of these new talents will stand out the most?" he said with a smile. Shen Qingqiu's spirits rose. The words, "make our predictions," weren't actually referring to divine fortunes, but instead to gambling. To be clear, it was about betting on the talent you had your eye on. Cultivations needed entertainment too, after all. Also, the stakes used in these bets weren't tacky monetary items like gold or silver, but artifacts, spirit stones, or even the names of disciples who would be sent to study under other sects. They also wouldn't bet anything of vital importance, but it was still one of Immortal Alliance Conference's traditional entertainment activities. Anyone as dignified as the first-class sect leader like Yue Qingyuan had to be conscious of their status and wouldn't indulge in things like this. But naturally, many others were willing to join the fun. A short moment later, the daze was roaring with enthusiasm. Dozens of bets were being laid. Quite a few bets were on their own disciples. For example, Qi Qingqi bet on Liu Mingye's victory. Shen Qingqiu didn't even need to think, and straight away he bet 5,000 spirit stones on Luo Binghe. Such a daring move caused quite a ripple. Even Yue Qingyuan paused in his polite exchange of greetings with the abbot from Zhaohua Monastery, his gaze shifting towards Shen Qingqiu. Shen Qingqiu saw that Yue Qingyuan was about to speak, but chose not to. "My brother sect leader, this is just a bit of fun," he said, "to encourage Binghe a little." "Just for fun," Liu Qingge sneered. "If you shattered the entirety of Qingjing Peak, would you even find 1,000 spirit stones in the rubble?" Shen Qingqiu clammed up. Indeed he wouldn't. When placing a bet here, you only needed to write it down. The accounts were settled afterward, and you didn't need proof of funds. Because everyone here had name and reputation, there was no fear that the debts would be blown off. Shen Qingqiu knew that betting on Luo Binghe was a sure win, and so he raised the stakes. After all, no one else knew exactly how many assets he possessed. Yue Qingyuan was probably afraid of the sect being embarrassing before outsiders, and he rushed to smooth things over. "All right, lower your voices. Of course there would."
"Huh. Brother sect leader, you'll be his guaranteer?"
Qi Qingqi butted in, getting right to the point. "I will," said Yue Qingyuan. "If you lose, who pays?" Liu Qingge asked. "Me," said Yue Qingyuan. "If I win, who keeps the payout?" asked Shen Qingqiu. "You," said Yue Qingyuan. And so an agreement was reached, and everyone other than Liu Qingge rejoiced. Shen Qingqiu happily went to make his bet. The gathered cultivators quietly wondered why they'd never heard of Luo Binghe. You couldn't really blame them. The current Luo Binghe's method of operation was low-key and modest, and he was unwilling to claim credit. Every time he did a good deed or completed a task, he quietly took his leave. This prevented his reputation from growing, so his skills and talents had never shown. Those unaware of the situation assumed Shen Qingqiu was doing exactly as he'd claimed, and just making a show of good faith to encourage his disciple. Below the dais, after the participants took their oath together, they formally entered the venue. There were many of them, so 12 different entrances had been erected through which the participants would enter in assorted groups of mixed sects. The participants, shaking with nerves, stepped into Juedi Gorge and began their expeditions. On the dais, the members of the older generations, who'd long since achieved success and made their reputations, had finished their round of betting. They sat with unruffled composure, some of them even exchanging pointers, chatting, or chewing on melon seeds. Within the venue flew more than 100 spirit eagles controlled by experts. The silver rings around their talons were inlaid with special crystals. As they soared, a panoramic view of the people and scenery below was projected onto the dais' numerous crystal mirrors, the effect similar to that of surveillance equipment. Someone smiled from ear to ear. "Ha! As expected, Gong Yixiao is the first to place right after entering," they exclaimed. On the gold-inscribed tablet, the first 10 names all shone with bright light. At this time, Gong Yixiao had already reached the first place position. Right after his name was a number 12. That is to say, a mere hour in, he'd already eliminated 12 demonic creatures and obtained 12 prayer beads. Even Liu Mingyan, close behind in second, had only obtained 6 prayer beads. A large gap had already appeared. A youth dressed in white was reflected on a crystal mirror, his figure elegant and unrestrained like drifting clouds and flowing water, yet his actions were quick as lightning. In an instant, he shredded a shrilling scream vengeful ghost into scattered smoke. An unceasing stream of excessive praise rose in response, and Shen Qingqiu smiled without speaking. This Gong Yixiao, although he looked favored and blessed, overflowing with incredible presence, actually, he was at best only $half better than his fellow cannon fodder. He was a typical character trope who was handsome, of good lineage and surpassing talent, loved by girls, full of mettle, and accomplished in his youth. But, unfortunately, there was also the protagonist, so he was doomed to serve as a lead cannon fodder's foil. Though most bets for the top ranker had been placed on Gong Yixiao, sorry to say, he wouldn't be the first for long before Luo Binghe kicked him off the spot. Luo Binghe's name was currently in the middle of the pack. The number after it was a mere 1. Yet Shen Qinqiu wasn't worried at all. He knew that once tonight arrived, and once the curtains lifted on that breathtaking climactic event, Luo Binghe's name would soar unstoppably up the charts. The first day of the Immortal Alliance Conference approached midnight. A round golden moon hung high in the sky, and a dais gleamed bright beneath the lamplight. Among the crystal mirrors, Shen Qinqiu finally found one displaying Luo Binghe. Currently, he was slowly moving through the forest, spotlessly clean and without a trace of exhaustion. His eyes were like stars, and it seemed as if they could see right through the crystal mirror. However, he wasn't alone. Most of the participants moved by themselves. If people teamed up to fight the monsters, how would they divvy up the beads? At most, they might cooperate with those they were familiar with, forming teams of 2 or 3. There were also some incredible female cultivators, but on the whole, these girls' strength and mental fortitude was lacking, and they often required help. Their teams were mainly composed of sect brothers and sisters who got along well, and they spent their time playing around instead of actually working. Basically, they looked quite hopeless. Yet, following Luo Binghe were 7 or 8 other individuals, and all of them were either delicate girls or young disciples. This group drew a great deal of attention. Some of the audience even stopped watching Gong Yixiao's heroic exploits, switching over to size up this bloated team and finding it too strange to look away. In the group, the one walking closest to Luo Binghe was a Huanhua disciple in light yellow robes, holding a night pearl to light the way.